I think we can start this event. Good evening, everyone, both in the room and online. Welcome to this lecture, which will officially inaugurate the PRIN 2022 research project, Memory and Space in Ancient Athens, Topography, Monuments, Mindscapes. The project is funded by the Italian Ministry of University and Research and is led by myself as principal investigator, together with my colleague Emilio Rosamilia from the University of Perugia. The research team also includes two postdoc scholars, which I am happy to introduce, Michael Castellino and Antonio Iacoviello. A digital humanist is also part of the project, Giordano De Coste, who unfortunately was not able to get to Trento today. Before giving the floor to our guest speaker, Professor Marion Meyer, please let us tell you a little something about this project, which aims at investigating the formation, transmission, and transformations of historical memory in classical Athens, as it can be seen through space. The project is inspired by the growing scholarly focus on the means and forms of social memory, the recent attention given to non-historiographical media of memory, and the paramount importance acknowledged to space as a framework for social memory. Building on these research lines, which have been specifically cultivated here in Trento for several years by the Greek history team, Elena Franchi, Maurizio Giangiulio, and myself, building on this line, the project will try to reconstruct a sort of stratigraphy of the Athenian spatial memory of historical events from the Persian Wars to the Lamian War. Classical Athens is notoriously a most fortunate case in the ancient Greek world in terms of both quantity and quality of the available evidence. Among the extant major archaeological and topographical studies, we would like to credit a special importance as a ground reference work to us to the series of the Studi di Archeologia e Topografia di Atene e dell'Attica, resulting from a wide research project which was ideated by Professor Emanuele Greco, former director of the Italian Archaeological School of Athens. Any expected output of this project, in particular an interactive digital database, will be based on the city maps included in those important volumes. Not the single pieces of evidence, but space and spaces, as milieu and lieu de mémoire, will be investigated as they accommodate different media of memory. Not only monuments and inscriptions, but also performative, ritual, religious practices of memory. We will explore which representation of the commemorated historical event they offer, and to this aim, we will treat them not as disiecta membra, but as parts of semantic networks, parts of wider mnemonic frameworks. In other terms, we will devote special attention to spatial relationships, both in a synchronic and a diachronic perspective. So spatial relationships as expression of and vectors for semantic dialogues among different media of memory, focusing on the same or on different historical events which can be put in relationship with each other, solidarily or competitively or other kind of relationships. These scenarios are extremely diversified. More in concrete, the same event can be commemorated differently with completely different historical meanings and features across both time and space. And in each context, its spatial frameworks can play an active role in shaping and reshaping its earlier meanings. In this sense, then, we speak of a stratigraphy of spatial memory as a possible way of looking into the different layers of the Athenian social memory of the past. This kind of investigation will pair a detailed philological analysis of the literary, epigraphic, and archaeological evidence, and a clear theoretical and methodological framework, combining interpretive paradigms and patterns from memory studies and spatial studies together. For the sake of clarity, I will briefly and very selectively mention some of these before leaving it up to my colleague Emilio for some specific insights into the topics of our project. For the last 3 decades, memory studies have been turning on the lights on the past, not the past as it happened, but the past as it is remembered, commemorated, represented, and narrated in each specific historical context. We are now generally aware that there is a lot of past outside of history, of proper history as a scientific discipline, a lot of past which needs to be taken into account in order to pursue wide, comprehensive historical researches. Jan and Aleida Assmann's concept of mnemohistory and Hans Joachim Gerke's concept of intentional history do belong now to the renewed toolkit of the ancient historian. A growing attention to non-historiographical forms of memory derived from this mnemohistorical approach. Therefore, for instance, monuments and inscriptions are not anymore conceived as a kind of hard data, as pieces of evidence of the historical event they refer to, but as media of memory, as pictures of the events, not as it happened, but as it was imagined in a specific context. And this is where spatial studies come in. Despite the connection between memory and space was apparent straight from the earliest attempt to conceptualize the functioning mechanisms of memory, let's think about the invention of mnemotechnics by Simonides, with all its later tradition through Roman and medieval times. It was only in the 40s of the past century that the connection between memory and space was theorized within a wider scientific reflection on how groups and communities remember and narrate their past. In other terms, how they built their historical traditions. Maurice Alvac's legendary Topography of the Holy Land was pathbreaking in this regard. The 70s marked then a further step towards the definition of spatial studies as a proper area of investigation, with the seminal work on the production of space by Henri Lefebvre. In the 90s then, Eviatar Zerubbabel introduced the concepts of social mindscapes and mental maps at the intersection of cognitive psychology and the sociology of knowledge. At this point, memory studies and spatial studies were ready to meet each other and effectively began cross-fertilizing. Jan Assmann in particular introduced the concept of mnemotope into the study of ancient Greek history, stressing the role of space and of the spatial frameworks of memory in shaping the ancient historical narrations of the past, outside and also within historiography. Several other studies then appeared exploring the entanglement of memory and space in the ancient world, and several neologisms appeared, such as topographic semantics, spatial politics, memoryscapes, and others, suggesting a pretty widespread scholarly sensitiveness and awareness of the potential of the mnemospatial approach on which our own project is based. Please, Emilio.
Thank you, Giorgia. When we proposed our project, we decided to tackle with the transformation of the topographic and monumental landscape of classical Athens, in connection with the developing collective memory of historical events, from a wide-ranging perspective. However, a project such as ours requires a few boundaries to be set beforehand. In particular, we have set ourselves a chronological one. We will be focusing on monuments, inscriptions, spaces, and all kinds of architectural and physical remains dating from a period of little less than 2 centuries, between the Persian Wars and the Lamian War. We are taking into account earlier monuments as well, if they were still standing and still relevant for civic memory, and especially if they were altered or renewed during the 5th century or the 4th century. Moreover, in dealing with commemoration of earlier events, we are narrowing down our attention to historical ones, not earlier than the attempted coup by Cylon and his demise by the partisans of Megacles the Alcmeonid. Let me give you a few examples and some preliminary questions. The 5th century opened with an event that fueled Athenian memory, self-representation, and public discourse for the next few centuries, that is, the Persian Wars. As Giorgia Proietti recently pointed out in a book on the topic, commemoration of these events started in the immediate aftermath of the war and included monuments, inscriptions, rites, festivals, cults, as well as public discourse and oral traditions. The memory of the Persian Wars left long-lasting traces in the Athenian urban landscape. Commemoration focused on the 2 victories of Marathon and Salamis, which were described as a mainly Athenian effort and took place in Athens itself, as well as on the battlefields and in Panhellenic sanctuaries. The memory of these events was kept alive by monuments and landmarks throughout the city. To focus on the memory of Marathon alone, in Athens we have the offering of Callimachus on the Acropolis, the sanctuary of Pan, the funerary monument at the Kerameikos, the painted stoa in the Agora, the Athena Promachos, the Parthenon friezes, and the frieze of the Nike temple. Even the commemoration of later events, such as the victories of the Delian League in the 470s and 60s, the Athenian achievements during the so-called First Peloponnesian War, the Athenians' reactions to the Spartan invasions of Attica, and even Cleon's success in Pylos in 224, the commemoration of all these later events still played on the spatial connection with the monuments of the Persian Wars to create a common and at the same time multi-layered memoryscape. For instance, the spatial closeness of the painting depicting the Battle of Marathon in the painted stoa and the shields of the Spartans captured in Pylos are hardly happenstance, but rather contribute to preserve the memory of both events as major Athenian military successes and contribute to create a common theme by means of juxtaposition. Memory of events dating from the years of the Athenian Empire and the Peloponnesian Wars is closely connected with other monuments and infrastructures, such as the post-Persian city wall, the long walls, the sanctuaries on the Acropolis slopes, or at the Academy. The casualty lists and the funerary monuments at the Kerameikos require our full attention as well, both those preserved on stones and those known only by Pausanias. To understand them, we must look at Pausanias' general picture with wary eyes. Instead of looking at the Mosian Sima as a crystallized landscape, oblivious of its changed aspect over the centuries, we need to understand each monument within the framework of its spatial, chronological, and semantic contexts. The 4th century is a particularly relevant one for our analysis. While in the previous century our sources are mostly archaeological and epigraphic, now we have to take into account many literary texts as well, including, for instance, the Attic orators or the dialogues of Plato. These sources offer inputs about the status and evolution of the Athenian memoryscapes and mindscapes, as well as to the different importance attributed to events, places, and monuments by the 4th century Athenian society. The beginning of the 4th century was also a fundamental moment in the reshaping of Athenian memory and landscape. With the end of the Peloponnesian War, both the political situation and the city's landscape had changed, sometimes drastically. For instance, the long walls, which had been a symbol of Athenian power during the previous century, were no longer there. Moreover, the Athenians had to deal with a set of traumatic events, such as the regime of the 30 tyrants, its eventual demise, and the restoration of democracy by Thrasybulus. Those were remembered and commemorated by new monuments and inscriptions. Among these new monuments, we find, for instance, the altar of Lethe inside the Erechtheion, mentioned by Plutarch, that likely dates from this same period. This altar, dedicated to the personification of forgetfulness, became a tangible sign of the amnesty following the end of the 30, and it stood not far from the place where a yearly sacrifice commemorated the same event. If the beginning of the century is characterized by intense civil strife, the following decades saw the Athenians involved in conflicts with Spartan Persia that could not but leave traces on the city's landscape as well. Athenians set up monuments and honorific decrees for generals and foreigners who contributed to restore the city's relevance on the international stage. Men such as Chabrias, Conon, Iphicrates, and Timotheus. It is no happenstance, once again, that statues of all these men found their way to the area in front of the Stoa Theus Eleutherius, on the Agora, and not far from where the 377 BCE decrees of Aristoteles about the founding of the Second Naval Athenian League also stood. While this is a particularly striking example of an intentional alteration of the landscape in order to create a memoryscape, this is but one instance of a rather common practice, We might wonder, for instance, which other areas were involved with the preservation or the creation of the memory of these men and their successes. Moreover, how was the city's past put to use in order to legitimate conflicts and Athens' renewed imperial ambitions? Lastly, the late 4th century provides a particularly interesting moment for the evolution and the revision of civic memory and our understanding of the memory strategies employed. During the so-called Lycurgan era, Lycurgus of Butari and his collaborators intervened to reform civic finances and administration. Among other effects, these reforms led to building and restoration projects involving many 5th and early 4th century sites and spaces, such as the Pnyx, the Theatre of Dionysus, and many others. While each intervention became a monument to the prosperity of this decade and influenced the Athenian mindscapes for years to come, these actions necessarily involved revamping, reshaping, repurposing, erasing, or obliterating memory of previous events throughout the Athenian landscape. Having given you this brief sample of our work, I must say that in the next few years, our project will try to shed some light on all of them. Thank you for your attention, and back to you, Giorgia.
Yes, time has come to apologize. Time has come to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Marion Meyer, Professoressa Emerita at the University of Wien. I invite you to come here. Certainly, she does not need any presentation. However, to the benefit of the younger in the audience, I would like to stress that she is an internationally renowned classical archaeologist with, however, a remarkable wider historical sensitiveness, which we appreciate a lot, and which is the reason why my colleague and I have invited her to deliver this lecture. She studied classical archaeology, ancient history, and ancient Greek in Bonn and Munich. She defended her PhD thesis in 1984 in Bonn and her habilitation thesis in 1997 in Hamburg. She taught in Munich, Hamburg, and Gainesville, Florida, and was a professor of classical archaeology in Bonn first and then in Vienna until 2020. Her main research interests are ancient Greek culture, ancient Athens, visual communication, the creation, tradition, use, function, and significance of images, phenomena of acculturation in the Eastern Mediterranean. Among her numerous publications on these subjects, I would like to mention the book Athena, Goddess of Athens, Cult and Myth on the Acropolis Until Classical Times, which was published in German in 2017. And I would also like to mention two important books that she has recently co-edited, Innovations and Inventions in Athens, circa 530 to 470 BCE, Two Crucial Generations, co-edited with Gianfranco Adornato in 2020, which offers fundamental insight about the topic of our project itself. And the most recent, Unveiling the Hidden Face of Antiquity, Mysteries and Cryptic Cults, co-edited with Menelaos Christopoulos and Athena Papachrysostomo in 2023. She currently works on the commemoration of the dead in classical Athens and on the iconography of royalty in early Hellenistic Egypt. She is also teaching a doctoral seminar as a visiting professor in Trento in this period, a doctoral seminar which focuses on sites, spaces, and monuments in late archaic and early classical Athens. Today, she's going to speak about the tropaion monuments for the Battle of Salamis. So many, many thanks from the two of us, from our team, and all the scholarly and student community here in Trento for accepting our invitation. I'll shut myself up and the floor is yours. You can sit down here and we will go sitting down.
La sequenza delle immagini. Perché questo non è il mio. Non è la mia.
Questo è il power.
Ah, sì, sì, sì.
Così.
E poi così. Un attimo su. Allora, Good evening, and very, very many thanks to you, Giorgia and Emilio, for inviting me to give this lecture. It's a very great honor for me, to be the inaugural speaker for your very promising project. You see the title of my lecture here. What you do not see is the fact that this is not, of course, the Tropaion monument. Victory is a somewhat fuzzy concept that may be subject to subjective judgment. This is even true for a victory in a fight, may it be a duel or a mass battle, which at first sight seems to be more straightforward, at least in cases when the fight results in the dominance of one party and the defeat of another. Such victories must have been won ever since Homo sapiens had something to win or to lose by fighting. The results of victory and defeat continue to be part of the experience of the fighters and of all those who were affected by the outcome. They might enter the collective memory, first by being communicated by narratives, songs, poems, then by becoming part of the cultural memory when the recollection and reminding of the respective victory has been firmly integrated into the knowledge and practices of the society. For the construction of cultural memory, monuments play an important role as tangible and durable anchors for memory. I cannot trace the history of commemorating victories here. Let me only say that in early Greece, the tales of fighters, who were believed to have been the forefathers of the audience, were sung, but there were no monuments that commemorated the efforts and the glory of the protagonists as these modern monuments do. In early Greece, one could see a lot of images of severe fighting, but not victory and triumph. The scenes concentrate on the performance of the combatants. There was, however, a custom of demonstrating victory. At the spot where the defeated enemy had turned and fled, the victorious party would erect a wooden post and attach a hoplite's armor to it, and thus create a visible marker of victory that outlasted the actual fighting. This marker was called tropaion, from trepo, to turn. It is disputed when the custom of erecting tropaia emerged. It is first mentioned in the context of the Persian Wars, and the term tropaion is first attested in one of Aeschylus' plays performed in 467 in the Septem. The earliest visual evidence dates to about that time. See at the left, in the left slide, in the left image, the Nike at a tropaion on an Athenian vase in the process of attaching a helmet to this post. And at the right, you see the unique example of a preserved tropaion of later times. I will focus on tropaion monuments, objects that were not created spontaneously on the spot like the tropaia, but erected in order to claim the lasting relevance of the victory and to provide for its commemoration for some time to come. Ancient sources use the term tropaion not only for the ephemeral display of weapons, but also for permanent constructions. I will use the term tropaion either as a quotation from an ancient source or as the denomination of an ephemeral marker. And I will use the term tropaion monument for a memorial of a victory, even if it does not display weapons taken from the enemy and therefore does not look like a tropaion. Tropaia and tropaion monuments share characteristics with votive offerings, but the fact that they could be erected on or near the battlefield as isolated constructions sets them apart from dedications that are associated with other offerings and donated in sanctuaries. The earliest known tropaion monument is the one that stood on the battlefield of Marathon, 10 meters high. it has been reconstructed with casts of the original remains. An unfluted Ionic column on a square base was topped by a capital that supported a marble statue or a statue group, as suggested recently. The capital allows a dating in the 460s BCE, which means that the monument was erected roughly a generation after the actual battle in 490. I will concentrate on two tropaion monuments, of which I cannot show any existing physical remains, but which are particularly interesting because they were erected by Athenians for the naval battle of Salamis in 480, a victory that had cost them a high price indeed. A month before the battle, the Athenians had evacuated their city, and they had seen it being burned by the Persians. This is nice scenario by Manolis Kores, with a Persian standing on the column of the burned pre-Parthenon. Within a year, the Persians returned and destroyed Athens a second time in early summer 479. There's various evidence to suggest that at the end of the Persian Wars, the Athenians suffered a collective trauma. One symptom was the glorification of the first victory over the Persians at Marathon in 490. One might also call it a strategy to cope with that experience, with the experience of having seen Athens burned. The Athenians began to celebrate Marathon as a model battle because it had been fought by hoplites at a safe distance from the city. This makes the study of their commemoration of the victory at Salamis all the more interesting. In 480, the victory in the naval battle was celebrated with the erection of tropaia, with sacrifices, and with the dedication of spoils and votive offerings produced for the purpose of being donated in sanctuary. When Athenian writers of the classical period speak of tropaia for the victories in the Persian Wars, some of them might use the term tropaion metaphorically and speak of setting up a tropaion as another way of saying that a victory had been won. They usually refrain from giving any further information. The only ones who indicate locations are Aristophanes and Lycurgus. Aristophanes, in several of his comedies, mentions the tropaion in Marathon as an existing object. And since he writes in the later 5th century, 2 generations after the battle, the tropaion he speaks about must be the tropaion monument erected on the battlefield. Lycurgus, in the later 4th century, praises the forefathers who had been the leaders of the Greeks for 90 years and goes on to say that, quote, to crown their victory, not content with erecting the trophy in Salamis, they fixed for the Persian boundaries necessary for Greek freedom, end of quote. Because he refers to the time of the actual battle, he will have an ephemeral tropaion in mind, erected in the aftermath of the victory. The only author who implies the existence of a tropaion monument for the Battle of Salamis is Xenophon in the Anabasis. He speaks of tropaia as still visible tekmeria, testimonies for the victories over Xerxes by land and by sea. He does not say anything about their whereabouts or their design. Plutarch in the 2nd century CE is much more explicit. Based on Herodotus, he reports that Aristides, with the bravest Pulitai, the bravest citizens, had killed almost all the Persians who had disembarked on the island of Psytalia. And he adds that during the battle, the ships had concentrated near this island and the fiercest fighting had taken place there. Therefore, he says, a tropaion stood on Psytalia. Plutarch's use of the perfect Hence, tropaion hesteken attests to the continued existence of this tropaion. He must be speaking of a tropaion monument. Psyttalia is the small island next to Kynosura, next to this easternmost tip of Salamis, that together with Psyttalia kind of closes the Strait of Salamis to the south. The tropaion monument would have stood on the northwestern shore of Psyttalia, the only area on this rocky island where boats were able to land, and where Ludwig Ross in 1839 saw a, I quote in translation, small rectangular foundation of an ancient monument, end quote. Paul Wallace and Eugene Vanderpool noticed fragments of ancient tiles and pottery, mostly of late antiquity, when they visited the site in 1967. According to recent information by Janos Lolos, the site cannot be identified anymore. The island now houses a sewage plant and can't be visited. Another tropaion stone monument stood on Salamis, as attested by literary and epigraphic evidence of Roman imperial times. Pausanias, interested in topography, mentions various sites in and near Salamis town, situated in the bay northwest of Kynosura, among them a tropaion erected for the victory that Themistocles won for the Greeks. His statement supports the restoration of a fragmented line in an inscription of the late 1st century BCE. Akroterion en hu ketai to Themistokleos tropaion kata person. Akroterion, on which lies the tropaion of Themistocles over the Persians. And note that of Akroterion, only the nu is preserved on the stone. That the text refers to the island of Salamis is suggested by the previous line that mentions the old Salaminian town Kychriai and the temenos of Ajax, the island's local hero. The restoration Akroterion and the identification of this Akroterion with the Salamian peninsula of Kynosura here is based on the observation of travelers who, since the time of James Stewart and Nicolas Revet in the middle of the 18th century, had noticed the remains of a column on Kynosura and identified these remains with the most famous Salaminian monument known to them, the tropaion mentioned by Pausanias. A limestone block and a square cutting in the bedrock about 15 meters west of the eastern tip of Kynosura, still visible today, might be the trace of the base of the tropaion monument. We thus know that in Roman imperial times, there were two tropaion monuments for the naval battle, one on Salamis and one on Psyttalia. They might be replacements of ephemeral tropaia that had been set up right after the battle. But we have to consider the possibility that they owe their existence and location to interests of later times. If, right after the victory, only one ephemeral tropaion had been erected, it would have been a tropaion of the allied Greeks, because the victory at Salamis had been won by an alliance of Greek polis under the command of the Spartans. However, in a poem written by Timotheus of Miletus at the end of the 5th century, the Greeks start the celebration of their victory at Salamis with the erection of tropaia in the plural. And we hear of more than one tropaion for some battles in later times. So the Athenians and maybe other polis too might have set up an additional tropaion or additional tropaia of their own, in addition to the joint tropaion of the Greek allies. When Lycurgus speaks of a tropaion in Salamis set up by the forefathers, he might think of the Athenians as part of the Greek alliance or as agents on their own. Any tropaion monument for the naval battle, on the other hand, must have been due to the initiative of the Athenians. The alliance of the Greeks that had won the victory did not last, and after the Delian League had been founded in 478 with Athens as the hegemon, none of the former allies would have been interested in turning an ephemeral tropaion on the shores of the Saronic Gulf into a permanent one. I suggest that the two monuments were built for different reasons in different times. Giorgia Proietti has demonstrated how the narrative of the fighting on Psyttalia changed within a few decades. Aeschylus, an eyewitness of the Battle of Salamis, if not a participant, attests to the actual importance of the fighting on the islet in his play The Persians, performed in 472, 8 years after the naval battle. He tells that Xerxes had sent troops to the islet with the order to rescue their comrades and kill Greek shipwrecked. However, the great king had to learn that some god gave glory to the Greeks, and he had to witness that all of his men on Psyttalia were killed by enemies who had come off their ships and embarked on the islet in bronze armor. The trapped Persians were stoned, shot by arrows, or hacked to pieces. Aeschylus presents the fighting on Psyttalia as a glorious achievement of the Greeks. The audience hears drastic words about a severe blow to the Persian forces, but nothing about any Athenian excellence in this part of the battle. Herodotus tells a different story about Psyttalia, with the prominent Athenian Aristides as the protagonist. Aristides was known to the historians' audience as the commander of the Athenian troops in the Battle of Plataea in 479, 1 year after Salamis. According to Herodotus, Aristides gathered hoplites in Salamis and took them to the islet where they slaughtered all the Persians, Persas, Pandas. Half a century after the battle, a successful attack by Greek ship crews had become an arestia of Athenian hoplites. How could this piece of intentional history take root and become the orthodox view, prevalent for centuries, retold by Plutarch and others? I think there had to be an anchor, a permanent point of reference for this targeted commemoration. And I think that a tropaion monument erected on the islet was a perfect medium for the promulgation and perpetuation of the desired Athenian reading of the fight on Psyttalia. I take Herodotus' story as a clue that the tropaion monument was in existence in his times, built by the same generation that erected the tropaion monument in the Marathon Plain. It was a generation that had to cope with the trauma of the Persian sack by reassuring themselves that they, their seamen, and their hoplites had gained the victory, and that the price they had paid for the victory in the naval battle had not been too high. Whether there had been any ephemeral tropaion on Psyttalia is a matter of speculation. Plutarch follows Herodotus' account, or should we say the Athenian Psyttalia myth, and feels urged to look for a reason for the location of the monument. For the greatest crowding of ships in the most strenuous part of the battle seems to have been in this region, and for this reason, a tropaion stands in Psyttalia. This does not tell us what had happened in 480, but what in Plutarch's time was believed to have happened. In his time, the existence of a tropaion monument on Psyttalia begged an explanation because there was another tropaion mont on Salamis, as we had seen, a construction for which there is, however, no evidence before Roman imperial times. Because of its location on Kynosura and the remains of a column seen by so many travelers, the monument on Salamis gained prominence and overshadowed the one on the islet of Psytalia. Except for the explicit statement by Plutarch, any evidence for a tropaion monument for the naval battle has been taken as referring to the one on Salamis without even considering Psytalia. Honorific inscriptions for ephebes are prime evidence for the Athenians' commemoration of the Persian Wars in Hellenistic times. The ephebeia had become a formal institution in the Lycurgan era, 336 to 324 BCE. It was a combination, or it was a combination of military training and education in civic virtues that aimed at making young males good citizens. In the Hellenistic period, the ephebeia underwent substantial changes, which led to a drastic reduction of the number of participants and their term of service, only 1 year instead of 2. Military training continued to be an integral part of the ephebeia, but the involvement of the ephebes in cult increased considerably, as demonstrated by decrees that honored ephebes and their trainers for the fine performance of their duties. And these decrees date from the time after the liberation of Athens from Macedonian occupation in 229 to the early 1st century BCE. Their visits in various sanctuaries and memorial sites in Attica with sacrifices, offerings, and contributions to festivals by marching in processions and performing in contests gave the ephebes a conspicuous role and prominence, made them aware of tradition and of their responsibilities as citizens, and demonstrated the continuity of tradition and values by the continuity of practice. As Thomas Henderson points out, the festival in which the ephebes participated all commemorated, and I quote Henderson, former Athenian preeminence and national achievements, end quote. In most cases, these achievements were those of mythical protagonists. However, the ephebes also commemorated achievements of their historical forefathers. They were taken to Marathon, where their rites focused on the tomb of the Marathon fighters. Apparently, they did not visit the conspicuous tropaion monument on the battle site. They paraded to the temple of Artemis Akrotera on the memorial day of the Battle of Marathon and assisted the archon Polemos in the sacrifice vowed at the eve of the battle. And they commemorated the Battle of Salamis with performances at 3 locations, with processions, boat races, and other performances at the festivals for Ajax in Salamis, and for Artemis Munichia in Piraeus, and with sacrifices at the tropaion. Ajax, the local hero of Salamis, had been asked for help in the Battle of 480, and after the victory, a Phoenician ship had been dedicated to him. His festival, however, is first attested in an ephebic inscription of the late 3rd century BCE, and it is disputed whether it was a traditional festival or whether it might have been created after the liberation from the Macedonian occupation in 229 as an event for the ephebes. A writer of Roman imperial times, Pseudo-Plutarch, claims that Artemis, with full moon, had shone upon the Greeks when they were victorious at Salamis, and therefore they dedicated the 16th day of the month Munichion to her. This is the only source that connects Artemis with the naval battle of Salamis, and it is mistaken. The cult of Artemis Munichia was one of the oldest in Attica, and her festival was indeed celebrated on the 16th day of the spring month Munichion, which was the 10th month of the Attic year. The naval battle, however, had been fought in the fall, in the month Boedromion, the third month of the Attic year. And the operations in the night before the battle, as told by Aeschylus and Herodotus, would not have been possible in the light of the full moon. The connection of Artemis with the victory at Salamis must be a construction of later times, when rites of commemoration of the naval battle were added to the ceremonies of her traditional festival. And this combination was justified by the alleged support the goddess had provided in 480. Artemis Munichia was also said to have helped the Athenians who in 404 BCE fought the 30 tyrants. I follow John Michelson, Thomas Henderson, and others who convincingly argued that the Athenian linked Artemis to the victory over the Persians and over the 30 tyrants after 229, when they had regained control over the Piraeus. The liberation from Macedonian occupation was celebrated with a commemoration of earlier fights for freedom, the Battle of Salamis, and the re-establishment of democracy at the end of the 5th century. And Artemis was credited with having supported the fighters of earlier times. The Ephebes, as the youngest citizens, were the ones who, for the whole polis, regularly commemorated the achievements of the forefathers and demonstrated the Athenians' appreciation of the goddess' support. With their procession for Artemis Munichia and their contests in the harbor of Piraeus, the Ephebes celebrated the goddess' part in the success of the forefathers, and with their own presence, they demonstrated Athenian control of Piraeus. Now, the third spot. 7 honorific decrees document that the Ephebes made a boat trip to the tropaion and sacrificed there. 4 of these inscriptions specify the recipient of the sacrifices as Zeus Tropaios. The tropaion has commonly been taken to be identical with the tropaion monument on Salamis, because in 3 inscriptions, the visit to the tropaion is mentioned in sections that also speak of the participation in the festival for Ajax in Salamis town. It is, however, well known that in these inscriptions, the Ephebes' activities are not recorded in a systematic order. Although there must have been a regular curriculum, the sequence of the trips and activities varies in the inscriptions. There is no consistent chronological or topographical order. It is therefore not possible to reconstruct the Ephebes' itinerary or to infer the chronological relationship of the various activities and festivals mentioned. That said, the inscriptions are quite explicit regarding locations. They list the Ephebes' boat trip to the tropaion as a separate activity, distinct from the rites that are specifically recorded as having taken place in Salamis. And they consistently speak of the tropaion without specification, which means that at that time there was only one such monument for the Battle of Salamis in the Saronic Gulf. Therefore, I conclude that the Ephebes visited the only tropaion monument whose existence in Hellenistic times can be inferred with good reasons, the one on Psyttalia. Another argument is the connection of this tropaion with Zeus Tropaios. No cult of Zeus is mentioned in connection with the tropaion monument on Kynosura or with any other site in Salamis town. And why would a tropaion monument for a naval battle be connected with Zeus Tropaios? As already mentioned, Ajax was evoked after the Battle of Salamis, before the Battle of Salamis, and after the Battle of Salamis, one of the looted Phoenician ships was dedicated to him. 2 more looted ships were sent to sanctuaries of Poseidon, at Sunion and the Isthmus. After the battle at the Artemision in Euboea, fought 1 month before the Battle of Salamis, the Greeks had thanked Poseidon Soter, the savior. Poseidon is attested in connection with tropaion for later naval battles. Would he not be the obvious recipients for sacrifices, the obvious recipient of sacrifices at a tropaion erected for Salamis? Thanks for Zeus, tropaios would, however, be very appropriate on Psyttalia, where, according to the narrative transmitted by Herodotus, Athenian hoplites had crushed the Persians who had landed there. Is it a coincidence that Zeus' epitheton, tropaios, is first attested in 442 BCE in Sophocles' play Antigone, that is, only a few years after the erection of the tropaion monument, according to my suggested reconstruction? Thomas Henderson and others have argued that the activities of the Ephebes from the late 3rd century on were intended to demonstrate and celebrate the reunification of the polis and its autonomy after a century of repeated periods of Macedonian occupation. When the Athenians had regained control of their territory in 229 BCE, after the Macedonian garrison had left Piraeus, they paralleled their new freedom with the freedom fought for and won in the Persian wars. With their presence and performance in the Attic countryside, the Ephebes emphasized the Athenians' claim to their territory. The inclusion of Psyttalia in their itinerary makes perfect sense. With their trip to Salamis, Piraeus, and the islet between these two locations, the Ephebes literally bridged the Straits of Salamis and demonstrated Athenian dominance of the Saronic Gulf. The tropaion monument on Kynosura must be a later construction, erected after the last inscription that mentions the tropaion visited by the Ephebes, and this inscription dates to the year 199 BCE. A terminus antiquem is provided by the fragmented inscription of the late 1st century BCE that mentions Themistocles' tropaion. This inscription documents 2 Athenian decrees concerning the status of some 80 shrines in Salamis, Piraeus, the Attic countryside, and the city itself. They had the goal to restore sacred spaces that had become private possession, to restore these shrines to their original function, that is, the cult of gods and heroes. This decree thereby reasserted traditions and their future after a period of destruction, economic problems, disorder, and neglect following the Athenian involvement in the Mithridatic War in the early 1st century BCE. The tropaion monument was not part of the actual restoration program. It served as a topographical reference and was later seen by Pausanias and Salamini. We do not know where on Salamis the ephemeral tropaion referred to by Lycurgus had been set up in 480, or the tropaia mentioned by Timotheus of Miletus. After the end of the Persian Wars, the Athenians apparently had not constructed a permanent reminder of their victory on Salamis as they had done on Psyttalia. If they had wished to commemorate their big victory on Salamis as well, I assume that they had done so by rites for Ajax, as attested for the Ephebes in the Hellenistic period. Even if an ephemeral tropaion had stood on Kynosura, the monument, erected roughly 400 years later, cannot be regarded as a replacement. It was a project that owes its planning and execution to its own time. I suggest that the decision for the creation of Themistocles' tropaion was taken in the years after the Battle of Actium, Octavian's decisive victory over Mark Antony and Cleopatra in 31 BCE. Octavian, later called Augustus, propagated his fight against the Queen of Egypt and her partner as a sequel of the Greeks' fight against the Persians. And the victory of Salamis continued to serve as a means to aggrandize the first Roman emperor's achievement. It became a metaphor for a victory over Eastern foes, with the construction of the Parthians as the descendants of the Persians. With Salamis as a model battle, the Romans appropriated a legacy that enhanced their own interests with an ideology of superiority over their enemies that went beyond military success and comprised values and lifestyle. The Athenians under Roman domination, on the other hand, knew how to activate their potential and combine Roman interests with their own ones. After a difficult period following the involvement in the Mithriatic Wars and the sack by Sulla, the Pax Augusta gave the Athenians the chance to rebuild and reorganize, and to find a promising position under imperial rule, not only in relation to the Roman government, but also for themselves. The Athenians had to reconstruct not only buildings and institutions, but also their perception of themselves. When Octavian Augustus turned to the victory of Salamis in order to add his successful fight against Antony and Cleopatra to a tradition of victories over morally inferior Eastern foes, this interest gave the Athenians a superb opportunity to present themselves as the heirs of paradigmatic freedom fighters and to remind of their forefathers' model victory at Salamis, a victory claimed by the Athenians as their achievement. Its commemoration was a source of self-esteem and pride, as well as of appreciation and esteem from the side of the Romans. Among the last bronze coins that Athens issued in early imperial times are those that show an owl on a prow next to an ear of corn, a modification of the reverse motif of post-Sullan bronze coinage with an owl on an amphora. It has been suggested that the image refers to Actium. However, the obverse of this type has the head of Athena, and the owl links the prow to Athens. I think the images refer to this city and remind of the past victory of the Athenians at Salamis against the background of the recent victory at Actium. And I think that the creation of Themistocles' tropaion was due to the same mindset that led to the choice of this coin type. The fact that the tropaion monument on Salamis is linked to Themistocles in both sources, the inscription and Pausanias, is revealing. At the time of the Persian Wars, the individual merits of the leaders tended to be downplayed, and classical authors always credit the polis, not individuals, with the erection of tropaia. In Roman imperial times, however, the focus was on big men, and Themistocles was regarded as the winner of the naval battle, just as Octavian Augustus was seen as the winner at Actium. I wonder whether the consistent association of the tropaion with Themistocles suggests that there was an inscription on the monument saying that this was the tropaion for Themistocles' victory. The context of the monument can be reconstructed as follows. The archaeological evidence recently studied by Yannis Heretakis demonstrates that habitation in Salamis town, the principal settlement on the island in classical and Hellenistic times, ended with the Hellenistic period. Heretakis argues that in Roman imperial times, the site of the city and its surroundings were turned into a lieu de mémoire, with a focus on the most important events on Salaminian history, embodied by big names. Ajax, reminded of the Trojan War, Solon, whose statue stood on the agora of Salamis town, reminded of the war with Megara, and the subsequent integration of Salamis into the Athenian state. And Themistocles was the hero of the naval battle. Pausanias saw remains of the agora and the temple of Ajax in Salamis, and near the harbor, a stone on which Telamon had sat when his sons Ajax and Teukros departed for Troy, and a flower that appeared on Salamis when Ajax died, with letters on the leaves, which evoked a lamentation. A Hieron of Kychos, mentioned by Pausanias, was apparently located close to the tropaion. Kychos had a traditional cult on Salamis and had given his name to the old capital of the island. He connected the distant past with the historical battle because he had helped the Athenians when they fought the Persians. In Roman imperial times, local and super-regional interests focused on sites for heroes of the Trojan War, Telamon, Ajax, Toikos, or helpers in the Battle of Salamis, like Kychos, or those who were associated with both events, like Ajax. Was the creation of Themistocles' tropaion already part of a commemorative program to turn Salamis town and Kynosura into a mnemotope for the Battle of Salamis, or was this the inauguration of the program? None of the commemorative sites mentioned by Pausanias can be dated. However, Strabo anticipates the Periegetes focus when he says that in his time, the early imperial period, the island of Salamis was Epiphanes, conspicuous, because of the Ajacids and especially Ajax, and also because near this island Xerxes was defeated in a naval battle. And what about the polyandrion that is listed right after Themistocles' tropaion in the restoration decree? It has been taken for the mass grave of the Athenian war dead of the Battle of Salamis and identified with the tumulus on Magula Hill at the north shore of Kynosura, despite inconclusive archaeological evidence. That is where the modern monument has been set up. It is, however, unknown where the Athenians buried the casualties of their naval battle. Had they been buried on Salamis, the visit at their tomb would have been integrated into the itinerary of the Ephebes who honored the fighters of Marathon at their tomb in the plain and also at a monument in the city. Yannis Heretakis suggests that the site of Magula Hill might have been taken as a mass grave for the war dead of Salamis when such a polyandrion for freedom fighters was wanted, in the context of a program of commemoration in the late 1st century BCE. To sum up, the victory at Salamis in 480 had been largely due to the Athenians who had contributed the bulk of the fleet. The Athenians had also paid the highest price. They saw their city and sanctuaries burned twice. I concentrated on one aspect of the commemoration of the victory, the erection of tropaion monuments. Two such monuments are attested, one on Salamis and one on Psyttalia. The one on Psyttalia, although explicitly linked to the actual fighting by Plutarch, has been overshadowed by the one on Salamis, located in a more prominent position on the major island and seen by early travelers. I've argued, however, that in the decades after the battle, only one monument was erected on Psyttalia, and that this monument celebrated the Athenian narrative of their victory on sea and on this island, and that this was the only tropaion monument that existed in Hellenistic times. When, after the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, the victory at Salamis gained a new relevance, one of the Athenians' responses was the erection of a tropaion monument on Kynosura, a location that was to become a site that commemorated the home of the great hero Ajax and the site of the Athenians' most prestigious victory. Thank you very much for your attention and patience.
So, many thanks, Marion Meyer, for this wonderful lecture. Are there any questions or comments here in the room or from the online audience? I don't want to be the one who breaks the ice, please. For those of you who are attending online, you can type your question in the box and I will read it out loud, or you can raise your hands and then jump in. Okay, I'll break the ice. No, Emilio, come on, break the ice.
Thank you for this amazing presentation. I have a question about the inscription. I mean, acroterion seems the wrong word in that context. I mean, there is a problem there. The fact is, the whole sentence is connected with the verb apokatestese. So he made something anew. He restored something. So you don't restore a cape.
No.
So either there is a full, let's say, sentence missing something like, and that is upon the acroterion, and then the tropaion is not restored at all. So it's something just taken for a let's say, spatial reference. But at the same time, it's very close to the polyandreion. So it's something before that is restored. What are your thoughts on that? I mean,
Sorry. Well, I'm not at all an epigraphist, and I'm not a philologist and everything. But what I understood, well, of course, I went to see the stone, and where there are only these lines. You know, there's really a long section of the inscription that is not legible because the surface has simply gone. So what I understood, you know, really, if there's intensive and vast bibliography on that, is that the acroterion, whatever it is, let's say the tropaion and also the polyandron, that they are not the objects of any restoration, but that they are here just as topographical reference. But I could not just with these extreme lacunae. I could not offer an own translation, and let alone one that is better than all those who have intensively studied this. And I mean, of course, there are a lot of points of discussion, mainly about the contents of the entire program and singular items mentioned. But as far as I'm aware, there is nobody who really doubts the fact that these are topographical references. And I mean, I personally, frankly, I didn't even see the nu very clearly, but this might be, I'm just telling, that the mention of Pausanias was actually the base for even having the idea that this could be an acroterion. Yeah? So what we have is the tropaion Themistocles tropaion, and that is really which connects this inscription to the later Pausanias passage.
Let's say a small.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, the tropaion and the polyandreion can be used that way, but the fact is, you are taking a very long road to get there. I mean, you are saying we are restoring something which is upon the acroterion, where there is the tropaion of Themistocles against the Persians, and the tomb, and then a lot of other things. So it's possible, of course, but it becomes kind of we restored a small monument that stands along a long list of other things. I mean, if it is so, it is intentional, of course, and I mean it makes sense in the other period, but I'm not so sure of that acroterion. That's it.
No. Yeah.
That's just.
I mean, obviously, what is there is only a knee here.
Thank you.
It is not fundamental for your argument. In any case, it would just be a further topographical anchor and a confirmation of your reading of. But so, are there any questions here in the room? I'll just make a pretty general comment. Thanks for showing us that literary evidence, in this case, a literary evidence spanning for something like 7 centuries, from Herodotus to Plutarch, cannot be taken at face value and simply combined in order to reconstruct the underlying historical reality. if we dig into the literary evidence through the lens of memory, we will find out so many layers of memory which correspond to a different conception and meaning, which was attributed to the Battle of Salamis. And in this perspective, I have to say that I agree perfectly with your two major points. The first one, if there was a trophy, if one was erected in the immediate aftermath of the battle, it was on Psyttalia, of course, but for the very simple reason that the original meaning of trophy is connected to the getaway of the enemy. It marked the tropais of the enemies. So how can we imagine a tropaion in that etymological sense for a sea battle? For a proper sea battle. It was at Psyttalia that the Persians were somehow that they somehow were turned away from. This is the first point. To which I would like to add that in, as far as I know, in the case of naval battles, we have instead charisteria, so the dedications of parts of the enemy's ships or the enemy's ships themselves on seashore sanctuaries instead of tropaion.
Not instead, in addition to.
But how was the tropaion for a naval battle physically?
Yeah, you can. Sorry. Oops. Well, there are attested tropaia for various events in the Peloponnesian War, and that's when we get even the notice that there's more than one tropaion erected for one particular battle, and we do not have any representations of that of that period, but it can easily be imagined that you take parts of the ship and that you pile up some whatever, the acrostolion, the aphlaston, yeah, and there is even an early 4th century relief which shows a man standing next to what we would say is a regular tropaion with hoplites with an aphlaston in the hand. Yes, so to make exactly. This, and then it is preserved, unfortunately, only in a drawing, even on the Nike parapet. There are various trophies, and there used to be, and there was apparently one that also contained parts, that were looted from a ship. So to have to the physical appearance of a tropaion for a sea battle would not really give me much trouble. Yeah? But you are completely right. I was also very puzzled. How can there be a real a marker of a tropais? Because it first of all, not only that you are not able to put a marker, somewhere in at the sea, and here it would be comparatively easy because the straits are comparatively narrow, but it was apparently done. And what is curious is, I did not touch this at all, is of course the question whether this might have been the first tropaion for a sea battle. No? Because I mean, there are people who say, okay, the entire custom of erecting tropaia is very, very late. But I would rather side with those who think that the erection of a tropaion, not monument, but just of a marker, on the battlefield, even if it was only a minor encounter, you always have something that you can pile up and that you can mark. I think that the idea of erecting tropaia is quite an old one. And then of course we get into the discussion, when did the hoplites begin? And it is the idea of erecting a tropaion has been so closely linked to the emergence of the phalanx. And I mean, I don't see very big point in going into this, but I would say you do not even need necessarily a phalanx, to mark the spot where you made the enemy turn, even if these were 15 men or so. But if one discusses this problem more closely, of course, this tropaion one for Salamis gets even more fire, so to say, because it might have been the first instance that something like that was done for a sea battle. And just before, because it is, well, the first tested one, but maybe really the first one, I would not be so extremely sure about Psyttalia as qualifying in our side, as the one, because I mean Lycurgus, when he speaks about the time of the battle, he is the only one who says on Salamis. Yeah, so he and in this context, I think we have to take it literally in a way. So maybe there was nothing probably there was nothing, as I said. I argued Lycurgus didn't see anything, but there must have been some reason that he thought there, might have been erected a tropaion on Salamis because it is the biggest island. They were stationed there. I'm just saying that when I said it's a speculation whether there ever was an ephemeral tropaion, I was just saying I wouldn't push the point too far.
Yeah, Judy Barringer was asking you something similar to what you have just said. Might the tropaion at the battlefield have been something ephemeral, something thrown into the sea, and then a permanent marker erected shortly thereafter?
Well, we simply don't know. We simply don't know whether something was thrown in the sea. But tropaia, even an ephemeral tropaion, was something that had the function of a marker. So it was not just a process. It was not just a rite. I don't think that it would qualify as a tropaion to say, okay, I take this aphlaston and I throw it into the sea because that's where it belongs and I can do it with it. But it has to be something tangible, even if it doesn't last at all, isn't meant to last, but it is just a proof. It's a proof and the sign. And apparently, tropaia for sea battles could be quite far from what we would consider the actual battle site, because there was this one sea battle in the Corinthian Gulf. I think I'm not sure whether this was a formula battle, whether it was one in 429, but anyway, at the beginning of the Peloponnesian War, there were of course several naval encounters, but Thucydides says that they sailed quite a distance. And now I don't remember the context, either back in order to erect a tropaion or to do something at the tropaion, but he casually mentions this tropaion and the way to go there, and it implies that there was a comparatively astonishingly long distance between the actual battle site and the place where the tropaion was erected. And for sea battles, I would assume, but maybe this is also a too modern thought, that you would erect a monument for a sea battle somewhere where, not just on the shore, but somewhere at some conspicuous point of the landscape where it would appear at least for a year or so, or maybe 2 years, whatever.
But in that case, probably tropaion was another kind of tropaion. I think we should assume that there were two kinds of tropaia. The first one, the most adherent to the etymological word, to turn, and another one which was something much more similar to the Salamis tropaion of Augustan time, if your interpretation is right, which is just a victory monument or a memorial, which did not mark, of course, the tropee of the enemies, but the site as a lieu de mémoire, as you said.
Yeah, but we should not throw the baby out with bathwater. I think we should definitely, although we cannot really trace the actual objects, but we should distinguish between tropaia and tropaion monuments, between those objects that were installed. And unfortunately, we have no idea how long these things lasted. I mean, of these 3 ships, the 3 ships were not no tropaion, but the 3 ships, the 3 Phoenician ships were dedications, but one of them was still seen by Herodotus. So if a ship, is there for 2 generations, an ephemeral tropaion might theoretically also last for 1 or 2 generations. It might, if it is replaced very quickly, it might last for much less time. But the very idea of a tropaion is a more or less spontaneous action with actual objects conquered from the enemy. And in a naval battle, you have lots of things to take off a ship. And then the idea of a tropaion monument, and there we can discuss, and I've forgot the name of the German historian who also wrote about it starts with S. I just can't think of her name. Who said we should not call tropaion monument those monuments that do not look like tropaion, that do not have any weapons, or aflaster or something. These should be termed victory monuments, as opposed to tropaion monuments that somehow do not only replace an ephemeral tropaion, but also somehow make permanent the appearance, the visual appearance of a tropaion. Yeah, that's what we could discuss. But concentrating on function and on intention and on durability and on the intention of commemoration, I would really distinguish between tropaion, however they looked like, wherever they were set up, and tropaion monuments. And there I would say, however they looked like, when they were thought to commemorate a victory. Of course, we can call them victory monuments, but to distinguish them from these dedications in sanctuaries that, of course, also demonstrated victory. But I mean, we have to be very careful in order not to conflate phenomena that we are actually trying to study separately by terminology.
Judy Barringer goes on saying that I'm convinced of that the tropaion must be something tangible, but the turning point after the conclusion of the battle. Could a tropaion be thrown into the sea and allowed to float, or even have a temporary anchor on it, then something in permanent material later? But
everything is possible. But
she also says that she would like to go back to the Saronic Gulf with you in a previous message. So
yes, Judy, we will do that.
And
we already have an appointment in Athens for us. Okay, the near future.
Any other comments or question from the online audience, maybe? Otherwise, dinner time, maybe. So thank you very much once again to Professor Marion Meyer for this wonderful lecture, perfectly fitting with our research project. So
thank you.
Thank you once again.
Thank you.